Welcome to the Cannabis Breeders Network, where we get in the weeds with legendary breeders about the history, genetics, and cultivation of cannabis cultivars, all intended to elevate your growing game. This conversation is brought to you by Alpine Seed Group.
What originally sparked your interest in breeding?
It was the love of the plant, and it sounds cheesy, but it's like when I was a kid, like in the late 70s, 80s, and walked into my uncle's greenhouse and saw these big, beautiful plants. And it was just like, it was the smell of them, and it was different than vegetables at that time, because I'd always been like tinkering around with like flowers and, fruits and vegetables. So it was really interesting. This is a whole new plant. And at those times, you could make money off of it. And it was really fun to just have this and not smoking, when you're like a kid and it's like you're seeing like, oh, this is something that's bad. Why is it demonized? So that was part of the draw. It's like, why is this plant that provides so much happiness and wealth in a small community being demonized and not even smoking it? I didn't smoke until I was like 17 years old, but growing it since, around 12. And it was just having something that would always motivate you. And then when you started to learn about it, it's like you're getting this stuff from old Vietnam vets, and you're seeing these other people that have like collected this from all over the world. And it was providing for a lot of families in the North Coast. We'd have helicopters flying all over the place. And it's like you're growing a plant. And it's just a plant. And that was the one thing never understood. It was like, this is a plant. And that was before it was really even medical side. It was like, this is something that, why is the evil empire going after something that is just a plant? There's a great book, Jack Herrera, Emperor Wears No Clothes. And that book ignited this, wow, Henry Ford made a car out of it in the 30s. All these formulations that happened. And then all of a sudden it was just like we got stopped. And then looking into the history behind it even fueled more, because it's like, why is DuPont behind this? Why is Ford, all these people, why did you used to have to grow hemp for victory? And then all of a sudden it's just, we're just shelving this.
Hemp had the ability to crash a ton of industries, and they did not want to see that happen. So that's when they went forward and made sure that nobody could go forward with growing cannabis legally. You might actually told me this in a previous conversation we had, that some of that hemp, quote unquote, was actually, there's some Afghani types that had a high resin content. That's why he made such strong hemp fiber from that.
They weren't mass spec'ing everything. They weren't testing. You didn't have to have a COA back then. So if you're planting ragweed, ditchweed in Illinois or whatever state you're doing this, and then you have a bunch of Afghanis in there that high resin producing plants, they're just going in with the combine and harvesting it all and making something out of it. So it's that high fiber, that high resin producing plants at that time. And then all that germplasm, once we went into Prohibition days, we've lost 50 plus years
of genetic development, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you see the genetics that were being created. And at that time, this is in
late 70s, I think for me, it was in the early 80s.
And let me ask you this, people weren't really keeping clones. It was mainly you focus on your seed stock, creating new seed stock from phenotypes that worked well on your property, and you'd hybridize that for your seed stock for the next year, because that's traditional farming. People weren't really keeping clones. So there's a lot of these foundational lines, and people were collecting from all over the world, taking a pure Thai, pure Afghani, and creating these new hybrids, these F1 hybrids. That's the foundation of all these new strains that are coming out now. And so a lot of stock that you work with have a lot of foundational lines from pure landrace varieties.
Yeah, and it was at that time, it was being able to select a male. So instead of cloning when you found a female and you're going to clone that to keep reproducing something consistent, we would go out into the field and cull the best. You find the male that's, why doesn't this have mites on it? Why is this just the most superior number one racehorse in the field? So you'd take that male and you'd put it in the male jail. So we'd have male populations where we just collect pollen and then bring that back into the field just to do, because we needed seeds that following year. In the 70s, 70s and 80s, where you'd go in and do selections, you'd select that male, so you would, go and back cross it. Or even back then, it was like you'd find a female and then you just self it, so you'd have feminized seeds. And then we weren't looking at feminizing. We just needed to have a supply of that particular, whatever was the best at that time, which was usually like skunk number one, whatever. When you would bring a bag into a room and open it up, or you just have it in your pocket and it'd be like, holy shit, that's like some skunk number one, or that's that skunk, like
it just permeates the room. You're just like, oh my
everywhere.
God, it smells amazing.
Yeah.
Even double bagging it, you're like, you can't hide the smell.
You can't hide it.
Yeah.
And that was like those factors of like, what's the most unique, something that's different than everything? And it wasn't even what's everything else, because you could have hay at that time and it would still be marketable. And that's like the Afghanis, that skunk, the Hindu, the Mazar, these old lines about the 80s into the 90s, when more hybrid, when you started like having more crosses, and there was that whole Prohibition period in the 80s where camp really came down hard, and that the campaign against marijuana plantation, where you'd have cops from all over the state come to fly around in helicopters to look at people growing a plant.
Getting like to those foundational hybrids that your uncle's working with, was he working with just pure Afghani types, or was he hybridizing?
He was hybridizing. There's, from the Afghans, and then a lot of the stuff they brought back through Southeast Asia. And that's what really kind of fueled my explorations into like Southeast Asia. It's like, okay, where is this that came from the Vietnam black, the Viet black, or, the Cambodian black. And then, in Thailand, like the Highland Thai, like hazes varieties.
Super euphoric sativa.
Yeah. And crossing those. So then you're selecting for more of like on a personal taste. So it's almost like a winemaker. When you find something really good, you find a Nebbiolo or whatever variety you're looking at that appeals to you. So it was a personal taste back then. Now it's more making seeds for like what the public wants. But that personal taste that came through was, at the time, it was the growers and the breeders that were like, hey, this for me helps me. Don't smoke this in the morning, smoke this at night.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so your uncle was actually collecting seeds himself. Is he a veteran? Was he?
Yeah, so he's a veteran and collected seeds and brought them back. And then a lot of the old vets at that time that would trade seeds, or, hey, we collected this in, Vietnam, or, this was collected in Afghanistan, or this was collected in Africa. And then you'd have people that did the old hippie trail, and so like the Nepalese, and you had this melting pot in Northern California at that time where people were clandestine. They were living in the woods for a reason, because they didn't want to deal with the society. And they could make a living off grid under the sun.
So that makes a lot of sense. That sparked your interest, but then you've been on some journeys yourself for many, many years, collecting your own seeds. So I'm guessing that's kind of inspiration from your uncle. Can you tell me about some of the journeys you've been on to collect seeds?
Growing up in Northern California, it was being able to have access to a lot of the growers at that time, and that you would get like bag seed, or then you would just people that were breeding intentionally, moving into the late 80s, early 90s. It was like Trainwreck was one of the first ones. And that was, being up in Humboldt County. And it was like, okay, this Trainwreck, why is this so special? Like, why is this, everybody's going to pay more for this than anything else?
Why is it a standout?
Yeah, and where does it come from? What are the origins of that? And it's like, is it South America? Is it from Asia? And that's kind of like what fueled the trips to Asia early on, was like, found this one, it was like Aceh, and it's from the Banda Aceh province in northern Sumatra. It's this little island called Pulawai. And when I was in Bali, there was this herb there that was just incredible. And it's like, where is this coming from? Who's got this? Because I'm coming from Northern California, where I'm on, like, there's some incredible stuff being grown. But when I'm in Bali on this little island, and at that time, even, I think it still is, it's very criminalized. But you would find this herb and pay exorbitant prices for it. But where is it coming from? So it was called Uncle Bob. And so found this little island through, I was in Bali at that time for like 2 months. And where is this coming from? And like, what part of the Indonesian archipelago is this coming from? And we found this little island on the northern tip of Sumatra, and it was the Aceh province. And this little island, Weed Island, and it was sort of like out of that movie, The Beach. These guys, these Australian guys and Germans that were up there had and it was the first time coming from California where you'd walk in on something that was like an acre of herb. Back in the 90s was like walking into Disneyland on this little island with Pulaway. Beautiful island, like the most crystal clear, beautiful diving island. And these guys they were a bunch of old outlaws. They couldn't get back into their home. They couldn't go back to their countries. There was a couple Americans there, but it was Germans and Australians.
Got it. Okay. And they weren't able to go back into their home country.
No.
But they had a love for cannabis.
They had a love for cannabis.
But then they just took the Landrace stock from that island and started growing it?
They started growing it.
They didn't bring anything from outside countries?
They started to, and it was at that time in like the early 90s when they started getting, it was like Mark Emery back then had a seed, but it was Mark Emery, Cincy Seeds, that sort of time where you'd order seeds online or whatnot. So they were just getting all these seeds that you'd order out of a back of a magazine, or
mixing it in with the Landrace. So they're buying seed stock and then mixing it into the Landrace.
Yeah, and this is that problem. What happened is when all of a sudden you started seeing something that was a Landrace where people were bringing in new seeds, and they had this technique because I kept going back year after year, and then they had this one of them, Woofy, had this technique where he'd call it swirling. And it was the first time where seeing irresponsible breeding happen, where they just take all these males and they just go into a field and like
a shotgun method is
just
how I call it.
Shotgun method. And then like in Sumatra, there was this one elder, this old lady was awesome. She would only take what was from the island that she knew as a child growing up that her family worked with, that they would go to export, and only not introduce any new populations. She would never introduce a new male into her garden that she didn't know that it did not come from the island, and she just stuck to that. And that same, back crossing that same line, looking for like the superior one every year within that, the one that was thriving. And that was generational of a family that just stuck to that and being able to keep those lines. So then you're like, it's that preservation. And I think we're at this point now where it's like, especially with Landrace, how do you preserve that? And now that the laws are changing, it's being able to preserve that. And then you have that in a germplasm library where you're able to access that book again. So from Aceh, it had THCV in it. We didn't know that till 14 years later, that when we started doing analytical testing on different cultivars and like, oh, this is like really high THC, but what are these other cannabinoids in it? And then being able to have that Landrace is like going back to a library. And now breeding, it's like, okay, if we have these Landrace varieties, we can go back into the library and say, okay, we're looking for this specific cannabinoid. What are its origins? So finding like, when you start looking, that's like the art and the science that happened, I think, from that during Prohibition, where it was all clandestine. People wouldn't talk about even what they're doing. You didn't know what they were working with. And having to backtrack now to the origins of the breeding, that bringing the art and the science. Is it for medicine? Is it for recreational? I think it all goes back to a medicinal, it's PTSD, or it's to relax, or it's to get high, or, it's having that. So it was like having a germplasm library. And it's sort of this transition now, which is being able to go back into the library and go, okay, it's, 2022 into 2023. People want colors, people want terpene profiles, people want bags. So that's in the rec market, or you're looking at the medicinal market where you're like, okay, we're looking for these specific cannabinoids. And then you go to the industrial market and we want something that's producing high fiber, drought tolerance, all these different traits. So as a breeder, it's what market are you breeding for? And it's that mixed bag of tricks, it's like you and having to go back now and find the origins of something when you talk to other breeders, and it's like, okay, where did you get, what is this? And it's like having to baseline that on a name is not, we've gotten so caught up in the names right now, and it's like going back to where the origins, where it comes from, and you look at it on an analytical level if we're looking for like really high THC. But that's all these new cultivars that are really high THC, these hybrids, they've been crossed so many times, or back crossed, and then when you feminize it, this lady, I always call her Miss Way, but she had silver coins. She liked silver because she would do the old trick where you would like, not even the old trick, but you making colloidal silver. So this lady in like the 90s, 97, was using colloidal silver, making her own colloidal silver to spray plants to reverse them. So she would have feminized seeds. She would have her garden of feminized seeds to grow flower for export. When you're growing large populations and your seeds are feminized, but she would still keep her regular seeds, and she would have those in a whole other garden where she would go through and cull through all the plants to select the studs to collect pollen off.
And she kept that as her personal stock.
She kept that as personal stock
so
for her breeding purposes.
She sounds like a badass.
Yeah.
She knew what she was doing, because the feminized stock, that's what's going to create uniform plants to the most part, and you can probably mix them in the bags, and that can be your export.
Yeah.
But then she kept the F1 garden.
And this lady at her time in 97, she was in her 80s.
Wow. And so, wait, she would take silver coins and what?
Silver coins, you put a battery on it, and you basically draw an electrical current in the water. I don't know the exact process, but it's as simple as like a battery connecting to a silver coin in water, and it makes colloidal silver.
Wow.
And those differences are, when you're using silver thiosulfate and you're using, like, I just call it the silver water, and then you use colloidal silver, is looking at that. Now it's like, how much do you apply to the plant? And different plants actually take up that silver intake differently.
And for her, it sounds like she was a sensory-based breeder. That's what I really appreciate, especially somebody, she's in her 70s or 80s at the time. She didn't have science. She didn't have analytics. She wasn't able to get plants tested. It's all sensory-based and experience-based breeding practices. And so she knew, using her senses, that's the plant that I know what it looks like. I know what it smells like. I remember it from my childhood. It's ingrained in my mind. And then now, experience-based breeding is, I have my feminized crop. That's my commercial crop that I sell. And I have my, my regular seed garden where I make sure I make my new population of seeds, do my selections. But also, she probably kept that stock to herself, I'm guessing. She didn't really want to release that much.
She didn't release. No, it was all on island. She would keep those seeds for herself.
And she gave you feminized or regular seeds?
Regular.
That's awesome.
And feminized, but she didn't like feminized seed, and that was one of the first. It was like, it's like reversing this. This isn't right, but at the same time, for an application, if you're going to grow a lot, use feminized seeds. And I think that's that big transition right now we're seeing, where people want feminized seeds, and that's the whole pheno hunt thing. People are looking for something that's new, but that takes large populations to really be able to go through and cull through plants. Even if it's a nice plant, if it doesn't smell a certain way, or I think that's the art of breeding, where you're not only going in and analyzing it, but it's like, it's the classic, what's the smell like? Why does this plant not have bugs? Why is this plant, everything else is dried out, and why is this plant still thriving?
Yeah.
And that's just by it, like the the traditional breeding. And then when
sensory-based breeding is how I call it.
Sensory-based, yeah.
Yeah. But then what's your opinion and what's your approach in taking this old landrace stock and weaving them into the newer cultivars?
It's more a preservation of the land races to keep those pure, and then keeping those in the germplasm bank. So you always have those to access, and especially if you're looking for certain cannabinoid profiles, for varins, an example. When you find that, and then you're able to say, okay, the Ache, if we are able to cross this with a Congolese red based on its markers where you're doing that selective breeding for specific traits. So if that trait is a cannabinoid, or like on the chemo type, when you're looking for a certain terpene profile or a certain color, or like right now with the rosin production, selecting the Ache for its THCV, and then crossing it with an Afgui, or an Afghanistan or Mazar, to increase that resin production. And then when you look at that resin production that's coming off of a rosin press, when all of a sudden you have a juicer, and you are breeding specifically for somebody they want to produce live resin. Right now, it's like with the Landraces, it's preservation. It's keeping those pure in a library. And then being able to have that library, if you want to develop something like on this pink line that we're releasing with you guys, that was bred for high resin production and also for bag appeal.
Okay.
So it's breeding for that. But on the same side, on the pink line, it has high THCV in it. So on the medicinal side, you're developing something that if somebody's just looking to extract a certain cannabinoid, it's in there as well. So it's kind of a multi-purpose plant, because it's high THC levels, CBD. It has a full cannabinoid profile to it, but also it's, for somebody that's selling flower in a dispensary, it's new, it's beautiful. And then on the other side, if somebody's just going in and growing like acres of it, 1 to 100 plus, and you're going with just for extraction purposes, it produces what you want, what you're looking for.
So when you brought that cross, the pink, to that level, are you using a combination of marker-assisted selection and then sensory-based breeding as a combo
Correct.
of both? And that's where you get back to, you want to keep these Landraces backed up and preserved. But you've also collected the data where you can send 1,000 seeds of the pink, and from the data they collect, you can do marker-assisted selection. Are you able to do that at that point, since you know these lines? Do you feel confident in that? Like, what's your approach on that?
And that's the one thing about with the plant is like going in with tissue culture instead of seeds. When you say, for instance, you're cloning, not a cutting, but you're cloning that same plant, and then you bring it to, if it's growing in Switzerland, and it's going in Spain and Bulgaria and Thailand, and you put it in all these different environments. And then even looking at that, when we did that, and then it's going outdoors, it's going greenhouse, or it's going indoors, and then you start looking at that information of what that plant is expressing, that same clone from tissue culture will express a different chemotype in all different environments. So that's this next step, is how you are able to look like, what are those inputs? Why is the UV different in Thailand compared to Switzerland or Northern California? And why do we see these spikes in THCV or CBDV, or these different cannabinoids, how they express themselves in different environments by different inputs?
Yeah, and how drastically different, just on a baseline level, there's just the flower structure, how it looks. So if you find a winner that you can grow really well, that worked on your property, give to somebody else, and they're just like, no, it didn't work. It got mold, it got this, it got that. So it's really difficult sometimes to do the selection if people aren't growing in a similar region.
And it comes back down to IP. We're at this transition point where it is techniques and it is protecting your IP. And it's like, are you drawing something out at the end of its flowering cycle, where you're just almost letting it die, and then you just blast it with some monopotassium phosphate and increase the resin production on it? It's the technique, and it's the IP too, that I think can really separate the different growers that are working with the same genetics. And if you give it to the right driver, it's like, you've got a good racehorse. Well, you give that to a different jockey, they can put it on the same track, and it's not going to win the race.
What was the first hybrid that you made from stock that you collected?
The Unabomber.
What's the cross on that?
The Unabomber was an Afghani cross with Trainwreck. And it was right after that whole Unabomber thing happened, and it hit the cities, and all of a sudden there was like the little Unabomber stamps they would put on the bag. This was before like marketing and stuff, but it was like, that was that Trainwreck Afghani. And it was like right when people started to name things. And it was really interesting because that Unabomber, like people in the Bay Area and then like Southern California, it started to be recognized. So all of a sudden we were able to get more per unit on that. Like, so all of a sudden it was something that like really separated. And then on Northern Lights Big Bud, that same time, there's this old strain called Salmon Creek Big Bud. And Salmon Creek's a place in Humboldt County, but that Salmon Creek Big Bud, that was like mid 90s when everything went indoors because camp got so bad, where it was like it produced, it didn't have that high of a THC level, but instead of like a pound, the average size of a pound, it looked like 2 pounds. It was that big bud in it. And those were two crosses that ran for like 4 years because we were able to run it. Diesel was still only $1.20 a gallon, and you could
Big old diesel generator out in
big old diesel,
out in the boonies.
That big old diesel generators, and you're an electrician, you're a plumber, and you're a farmer, and doing all this work, and having to like not talk about anything.
Yeah, totally. Everybody went from large outdoor grows. Camp started really cracking down. People went inside. But what's your opinion on a lot of strains have been lost because they were actually too good? They smelled too loud. People were getting arrested because they were grown, especially the skunk. I think people always talk about that original roadkill skunk. And one of the main reasons that I feel like it's kind of hard to find is because it would stink up a whole freaking neighborhood, even through 2 carbon filters. The cops would show up and chop all your plants down, and genetics lost forever. But have you experienced that with some of your genetics?
Yeah, and actually that like what breeding through Prohibition was one of those things. We're taking that roadkill skunk and we're like, all right, this is too much. Like we're way out in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, you pull up to your gate and you're like, okay, you got your triple carbon, you're all locked in to think it's not smelling, and you're at the gate like a quarter mile away and you can smell your room. And was like, okay, we need to cut back. We need to introduce like this Northern Lights, or the other one was like the Hazes. It was a little longer flower time, but it took that smell out. And that was breeding to get the smell out. And it's even a project I've been working on recently where we're actually, so the flower, I can't tell the difference. It's an OG, but we crossed it with a Thai haze that was high resin producer, but just no smell. It was like inert. You'd look at it and pop the bag, and you're like, "There's nothing in here."
Yeah.
But the THC on it is 20% plus. It's just no terps.
Yeah.
So with that, and seeing how farms are scaling now, if developing a cultivar that doesn't have that smell, where you can present that to have the data beforehand. If you're going into somebody and you're like, hey, I'm going to grow 500 acres in the Central Valley and it doesn't have any smell, it's breeding for like odor mitigation.
Because they're going to get complaints from...
They're getting complaints, and it's happened locally where people are like, okay, we have all these cannabis farms that are popping up, but it smells too much. It's too overpowering. So if you're looking to grow something for like high THC and it's just going to extraction or whatnot, and if you take the odor out of it, but it's more on like commercial level production, but actually having to breed for that. And I never, when you're breeding to take the odor out, where we were always like, we want this more skunky.
Yeah.
We want more fuel in there. We want more fruit. We want more, these different traits. But all of a sudden, we're looking at this. This still has high THC, but if we can breed something into it that's taking out the odor.
To save yourself.
Save yourself, or to be able to grow more.
That's a good point you raised, too, about not wanting 500 acres in the Central Valley smelling, or even in wine country. That's a big problem in wine country. Huge lobbyists very against having cannabis plants growing right next to their prized wine crops. They don't want that because of the smell is a big thing that they're worried about, and theft and things like that, security purposes, but it makes a lot of sense. So you're planning to drop a new seed line, the one we discussed earlier that has the pink in it. Give me an idea of what the pink is and what your vision was for the seeds that you bred.
With the pink line, it was just the old pink kush. It was the looks of it, and it was just this really exotic flower that had a full cannabinoid profile. So when we started looking at the COAs, and it's like, okay, this has 20% plus THC in it. It's got a little bit of everything inside of it, and it's really appealing. It's a beautiful flower, and it was something that was very much different than everything else on the market. And this was, years ago when purples were big, we transitioned from like the Trainwrecks to going into like purples. And there was the candy cane, and then there was just the pink. And the pink, when I started crossing it back to different Thai land races and to, this black African magic that I collected in Ethiopia, and we started seeing these different cannabinoid profiles express themselves. And then we started looking, okay, well, like what are the most valuable cannabinoids? And that was like that when CBD, this project started like in 2011, when we were looking at high CBD 1-to-1 ratios, looking at different ratios to create based on cannabinoid profiles. And then this one, this particular pink had it started expressing the varins in it, and then the high resin production. And when we we're running did a lot of extraction, through CO2, butane, hexane. We started seeing the different calibrations, what was being like, how much oil we were actually getting out. And this thing just was all of a sudden, it was
Remind the listeners, what's the cross on the pink again?
It's the pink Kush, and it's the Mazar and Pakistani Chateau.
Okay.
The Mazar's Afghanistan.
Okay, so it's pure Afghani crossed on the pure Afghani.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Or Pakistani, so
Pakistan,
Chateau's Pakistani
yeah.
Chateau.
Okay, got it.
Which later on became like there's the grapefruit in that. So that's one kind of had to go back into and look like what's the foundation behind this. So when we had that foundation of the pink, like the Afghani, the Pakistani, and then we started introducing, Trainwreck, which is, South American, and then started introducing different land races into that to see how it was expressing itself. And that was sort of doing like selective breeding when we started getting like analytics back and being, okay, this Thai Chiang Mai that's got high THCV in it, if we cross it with, this Afghani, the pink, that was like the beginning of selective breeding. We were really looking at like the analytics and just the basic chemotype of what's inside of the plant, and looking at what we can cross it with to make something that's limey pink green, or something that's got that really diesel-y feel to it. And that's going back to like, okay, what's inside of a sour diesel? What's inside of this OG Kush? Is this coming from South America? Is this coming from Asia? Is this coming from... And looking at this map of like how seeds were actually traded and how seeds kind of transitioned. It was based, the pink was something that it had a full cannabinoid profile, so it was selected primarily for that, and then introducing new parental lines to achieve different chemotypes.
And so the Pakistani Chateau, that came from...
Everything that I've acquired through that region in Pakistan, I've never been there.
Because I know Cannabiogen had a Pakistani Chateau. Where did you get your pure Pakistani line?
From a cousin of mine who was in the military.
Got it. Okay. So he collected it himself.
He collected it himself.
Wow,
yeah.
That's amazing. And the
different regions within Pakistan and Afghanistan, and like you have the Kabir Pass there, and he was just like, when he was in the military, it's like, hey, just grab me seeds. You're in Afghanistan.
That's awesome. So then, okay, so the male was a Pakistani Chateau male.
Correct.
You crossed that to a Mazar clone.
The Mazar was not a clone.
That was a clone. It wasn't a clone.
No, the Mazar came from a place like Edersburg in Humboldt County.
So it was a clone only, though, that you had collected. It
was a seed. It was a breeder from out in Humboldt County, out in like.
But you popped the seeds.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, so you germinated the seeds, and then you found the best representation of that population. Yeah. And then crossed that.
Yeah, and he just always called it Pinky because it had these beautiful pink hairs on it. And he was just always like, this is this like pink. And when it, back in like the early 2000s, it was like when purples went down, all of a sudden it's like lost its market appeal.
So everybody wanted green weed for like
everybody
10 years,
wanted green fuel.
10, 12 years, and then now everybody wants purple.
Yeah.
Which transitioned into the perfect time to now
introduce pink line back. Yeah, high THC, high terps. If you're looking to extract it for rosin,
it's amazing.
It's great. It's a juicer.
You can expect really good yields.
Expect really good yields.
What about water hash?
Water hash too. That was what we used to just
you think
run
it's like
washing
a 4
machines.
to 5% plus
return.
Return?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Okay.
If not more.
lot of those Afghani plants, that's what they're known for. Those pure Afghanis, they're doing that the old school the finger hash.
Yeah.
That's what they were for. They're Afghani hash plants.
Like chara balls, and it's like where you just go into the field and you just rub the plants.
Real live resin. That's taken off of live plants.
And this one, we just go into the field and you just like rub it, and your hands will just get like
all goopy.
I almost brought a flower up because we'll do and we'll just get these big balls, and it's so malleable, but it burns like it bubbles,
like
and it's
full
just
melt.
full melt,
real full melt.
Full melt.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, what did you cross the pink into? What are the ones you're excited about that you're about to release?
I always like going back to Trainwreck. There's just something with that Trainwreck. It's kind of a squirrely plant to grow, but when introducing the Afghani into it, and when the pink line, it sort of shortened it up for indoor growers. It shortened that time up. The density, it's really drought tolerant. So cross it with a lot of different hazes, stuff that was collected in Thailand, Vietnam, Africa, like the Black African Magic. It's purple, it's dark. Like when it crossed the Black African Magic with the pink and the stalks.
And Black African Magic is how would you describe that terpene profile?
Peppery, spicy, sandalwood, earth, like desert sort of. It's like a wine. It's like a petite Syrah. It's like it has a
dry texture to it. It has these
drier undertones to it.
Yeah.
And then this really cerebral high, like almost psychedelic. Mm-hmm. So it's a really
It's a good balance, because it sounds like the pink is more of like a pure Afghani. That's more of a down or a pure indica. Yeah. So you combine that, so you're getting a good combo of both. So you got the Trainwreck, the Black African Magic.
Black African Magic, and then on the CBD side of that went to the Tsunamis. So there's this Ringo who really set me on the path, like when I started working with CBD, and he was doing a lot of the testing with the same lab I was, and looking on it early on plants that were exhibiting high CBD. And that was like the Sour Tsunami, Harley Sue. And then years ago at Emerald Cup, I had a booth next to Ringo, and I was like, hey, what is this? It's South American, Thai, what are the origins of this? So it was like having to dig back. And it's like those South American, that Santa Marta Gold, the Panama Red, you have the Brazilian, Peruvian, I call it the Peru Blue. Then you go to Thailand. So it was like going to these other breeders that I looked up to at that time. And, he was one of those, like Soham Seeds, when he started doing CBD. He had all these 1-to-1 ratios. And then like with Cannatonic's another one that's really interesting, because that Cannatonic was from South America, and it was resin seeds, Jaime, when he started doing that, and then people started breeding that to breed THC out of it. So it would be compliant with this 0.03% guidelines. Okay. Pink Zealousy, pink cashmere.
And Zealousy is what is it?
What's Zealousy? It's a Hindu Kush.
Hindu Kush.
But there's the Jealousy. So Zealousy I released about 8 years ago, and under Zealously. And only released like about 1,000. I only went about 1,000 seeds. And then this last year, my brother's like, hey, there's this line called Jealousy.
yeah. It's I think it's from the Seed Junkie Genetics, I believe, is one who released that. So
and he does really good work. It's beautiful. The pink Zealousy was the pink crossed with the Hindu Kush. And then we took a clone we got this one clone out of Switzerland, this guy that had it. It goes back to when I met him in Vietnam. So it was like the Viet Black that he had brought back to Switzerland, just kind of kept clone only. And then, so had that clone. And what was that like with the Hindu? It was like 3 years. We just kept back crossing it.
Wow. So the Hindu clone, is that original Hindu clone only, or is that something you selected from seeds as well?
That was something that was given to me.
So there's this old Hindu clone that used to be up in Leggett. It was like the original Hindu. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, the original one is kind of like before Master Kush and Bubba Kush.
Yeah.
There's this original Hindu. There's this guy, I'm not going to say his name, he used to be in a wheelchair. He's the guy that I knew up in Leggett that had the real deal Hindu. He would never give it out, but it was the real deal one. It was, when it really hit back in, this is early 2000s, very early 2000s, nobody would give the cutout because they were getting the highest dollar amount per unit, and it was in high demand. And some people did hybrids with it, but then again, sometimes it's very hard to keep clones. Over the years, I've lost some clones I'm very sad about. But one of those ones is that original Hindu that's really tightly kept.
The Hindu, the Hindu hippie. Genes got. So that's where that came from. Who I got the Hindu from came from that Laytonville, Leggett area.
Yeah, and that's the one. That's the one that everybody refers to as being the real deal, just the one that blew everybody's minds in the early 2000s. People were just blown away. They're like, they'd never seen anything like it. It really thumped you in the head when you smoked it. It was really, really potent smoke. So that's the clone you used.
Yes.
So it's just the pink crossed to just the Hindu, or is
pink and Hindu.
Wow, that's a straight pure indica. That one sounds really exciting.
Yeah,
that's a great foundational line right there.
But then like the cashmere, I don't know if it is the Black African Magic. So with the pink line, I've got about like 60 different donors for that. 60 different males.
60 different males. Okay. Yeah. And so have you whittled that down to one just stud male, or are you still in the process of finding that one? 'Cause I know you've done some crosses with ones you feel confident in, but you still have 60 males currently of the pink?
No.
How many do you have? You just have a couple studs, or?
I have a couple studs, but I have the pollen. And the thing is that's the problem with the pollen. The pollen doesn't last long.
What's your outlook on how long it lasts? Couple years?
A couple years.
Stored correctly
stored correctly, and we've had some pollen that will be viable after 5 years.
Yeah,
but that goes down, and even stored properly. So that's the one with all the pollen, like every year, even if it's isolation pollination on one branch.
Yeah, totally.
Stored properly is, cryogenics the best. If you're going to store like for more long term,
like long term, I've heard like putting a desiccant, some type of thing, and putting it in the freezer immediately, and making sure that there's no moisture in the pollen. Make sure you dry it out properly, and then you put it in with some type of desiccant. That can help a lot. But it just depends too. It just depends, how well it's kept.
But on something like the pink line, it's like you get it stabilized, and you're on these. What's being released through ASG is all F1s and not feminized. And I think right now that's kind of gives people an opportunity. Like, I don't really want to release them because it gives people an opportunity to like go and select that male out. But it also gives people that opportunity because I can't preserve these anymore. Like, I've created such an extensive library, it's hard to keep track of.
And when you have something special, like I said, we've talked about, there's many clones I've lost that I wish I would have given out. And I learned that lesson the hard way. Even my buddy Kevin Jodry up in Humboldt, he's given me a ton of clone onlys, and he lost them. He called me, "You still have that?" I was like, "Actually, I happen to still have that. I'm going to bring a mom up to you." He's like, "I'm so happy I gave it out," because, there's things that you want to hoard because they're so special, but then before you know it, you lose it, and then you're like, I should at least give it to at least 2 or 3 people, because at the end of the day, you can't hoard it too much because then it will just be gone.
Yeah.
So and then giving people an opportunity to just play around, especially that one that you just described, the pink cross, that Hindu. That's the one I think I'm most excited about. In terms of a foundational line to play around with, that sounds amazing.
And people can get something new out of it.
And what's your, and actually just for the listeners too, what's your opinion on people using your stock to create new hybrids? Is it something where as long as they're giving proper credit and they're hybridizing things that maybe you're not, that aren't going to necessarily step on your toes and dilute your work, do you feel comfortable with that?
I think that's we're at this point right now where it's like if you're selling bulk amount of seeds to somebody and they're signing a material transfer agreement, that only goes so far. So when seeds are being released like this on small batch lots, then there's no material transfer agreement. Somebody has that opportunity to work with, which I'm fine with to a certain degree, but just give credibility to not switch the name. That's what's happened with the naming. It's like, okay, if this is a pink zealousy or if this is the pink line, future generations are going to be able to know, like, okay, this is what this was. This is what we started with.
Yes.
From the origins. So it's like, we're shrouded in mystery by so many of these names, and as a breeder, we're having to backtrack. So I think that if people can at least have that credibility within the name, not even the breeders, not so much, but it's like, hey, this was the pink, or this was an Afghani, this was a Hindu.
Yeah, I always try to look at it like 30, 40 years down the line and how people are going to perceive certain cannabis varieties. And I always joke around, I'm like, I hope people don't start thinking that, gelato is Trainwreck. Because in 40 years from now, if we don't do our part in making sure that we educate the current consumers, and with the rename game, people could easily in 40, 50 years think that Trainwreck is gelato. And that would be a very, very sad thing. And so, you as a breeder, especially releasing some foundational stock that is near and dear to your heart, that is special, I think going forward, and for all the listeners, giving credibility and being as transparent of what you're doing and what your process is actually going to yield more for you in the long term as well. People love to see a story and see, I bought these from Alpine Seed Group, this Hindu cross to the pink. I selected a winter male. I gave credibility, and I've always referenced that in my lines, because down the line that's going to be stamped in history.
Yeah, and I think that's always been an unwritten rule amongst breeders as well. As it's like, from those from Cincy Stars, the pioneers that put their necks out there a long time ago, and how you're able to get seeds. It's not like now seeds they're rather easy to come by.
Yes.
And as more seed companies are coming out, it's as long as we can keep on the same kind of like platform of like, okay, this is African, this is Asian, this is from South America, and that origins and that regions. And then that kind of wraps back around to when these indigenous cultures, like when I went to Aceh, and like you meet somebody who's been stewarding this seed and keeping it pure for like generations under prohibition laws where you could get in big trouble. And at what point are we going to be able to, 40 years down the road or whatnot, we're able to go back to this indigenous culture and be like, hey, you created this. We've got it sequenced. This is where it came from. You're the one that stewarded this so long, and it's going into a new pharmaceutical drug. And you should be able to get like a penny or a nickel or some sort of royalties off of that.
That's a beautiful thing. And the fact that you also collect that seed stock from that old lady, that's huge, because for all we know, maybe she's not around anymore, and now that that island that you're on is now just been completely contaminated with outside genetics that aren't pure.
Yeah.
And
it got wiped out by the tsunami, and that was like going there and helping that after. That's where the tsunami kind of started.
So it wiped out. So it got wiped out from the tsunami. Wow. I'm glad we kind of got to cover some of the things you're planning on releasing on Alpine Seed Group.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to with Alpine being able to like share these genetics and get it out to people that, if they want to work with it, that's great. I want to be able to empower other growers to grow the best, and especially in the market these days, if somebody starts with really good genetics, it could help their business or it could help their people out. And it's like that. I think the one thing taking this with Alpine is releasing stuff that I've been hoarding for a long time.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Been fun.
Cannabis Breeders Network is an Alpine Seed Group production and a member of the PodConnect's Cannabis Podcast Network. Connect with the show on Instagram at Cannabis Breeders Network and purchase the highest quality cannabis genetics at alpineseedgroup.com.